This week on Silicon Valley Successes, we have Phil Solk, who's a business-to-business sales consultant here in Silicon Valley. Many years of experience, and he's got a lot of great information that's going to help startups around the world. So stay tuned.
Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. We interview experts and entrepreneurs to give the world access to the knowledge and experience that is here in Silicon Valley. Our mission is to create opportunities for those who seek them and to help you to become the next Silicon Valley success.
Welcome back to Silicon Valley Successes. So, Phil, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sean. So I've been working in high tech in Silicon Valley and a couple other parts of the country for large companies and a lot of startups. And over time, I saw the patterns in what makes top-line revenue grow. And so a couple of folks got together and more recently started a consulting firm to help companies grow their top-line revenue.
Interesting. So, Phil, I just want to go right into the questions. So I've heard of B2B sales, I've heard of B2C, but what's the difference?
Well, I think the easiest way to get at that is talked about the longer version, B to B to C.
Okay, tell me about that. Business to consumer. Sorry, I should have been a little clear at the beginning, but yeah.
It all works. So let's say you sell software to a restaurant to help them run their business better.
Okay.
That part is B2B. But your software might also affect consumers, like making reservations or giving feedback. So even though you're selling to a business, part of your functions go to the consumer. So that's B to B to C when you get involved with their customers.
Interesting. So is there any difference, though, between B2B sales, B2C sales, or B2B to C sales?
They're more alike than different because in B2B or B2B to C, your primary customer and concern is still the business you're selling to.
Okay.
Regardless of whether you get involved downstream with their customers.
Interesting. Now, if I was a salesperson, though, if you're saying it's pretty similar, the sales, I mean, how do I actually go about it? Could you walk me through the steps of meeting that client? Yeah, just walk me through it.
Yes, what tends to work is to not come across as pushy. That's rule number one.
Okay.
Because you're trying to have a dialogue and develop a customer, it might be a better term than selling. And so if you want to develop a relationship with someone, it's really helpful to understand what problems they're trying to solve.
Okay.
Because it's something that's easy to talk to. And obviously, if you don't have a really firm understanding of the problems, it's going to be hard to continue to build credibility with that prospective client. After you've got a thorough understanding of what problems they're trying to solve, you don't want to jump into what's in it for yourself. You want to keep the conversation going and stay on their side of the table. So you can ask them questions like, what have you tried? You don't want to recommend something that they're already convinced doesn't work, even though it may work.
Okay.
So it's a good transition to continue the conversation going. And then the next step is still to stay away from your company and my customers and how wonderful we are.
Okay.
And to talk to them about what capabilities they see that would help them solve their problems.
Okay.
The longer you can stay on the same side of the table, the better the trust will develop and the more likely you'll be able to connect with that particular customer.
So when you go into this meeting with this customer, and you'd mentioned at the very beginning you're trying to learn about them, how much research have you done about them prior? Have you looked at their website? Have you asked some of their customers? How much research have you done before that meeting?
As much as you possibly can, but it does gauge on how many customers you have to work with per day.
Okay.
So if you're like setting up for someone and you meet a customer, a prospective customer, once every 2 weeks, you should do a lot of research.
Okay.
But sometimes you have to try to reach out to 10 prospective customers in a day.
Oh, wow.
So you got it's all over the board depending on the nature of your business.
Okay.
So it's a matter of proportionally to sound competent and to start with the impression that you're knowledgeable and you've done your homework so that they do trust you, because contrary to the illusion that people buy from people they like in the B2B world, is people really buy from people they trust.
Interesting. So then let's go to the second part you had mentioned. So the first was to find out, information about the company, and then the second part you had mentioned was to ask them questions. Is there like a list of questions you normally go through? Like these are the 5 questions, these are the 10, or how do you go about talking to the person without seeming, I guess, intrusive or making him uneasy that you're just kind of trying to steal secrets or something?
Well, also you have the concern that even if they tolerate questions, if you keep asking them, eventually they'll get disengaged. And it varies a lot by the product, but the idea is, or the service, is you need to be pretty knowledgeable about those and know the typical problems that people are going to mention. So you might ask some what's called situational questions about the size of their company or some things you couldn't find out that are really critical in your research. But then you need to jump in and talk about, hey, what types of problems are you working on, and where did your interest in talking to us come from, so that I can kind of help out and provide useful information.
So it is different if you're the one reaching out to them versus them reaching out to you.
There's all kinds of nuances, and the key is to be proficient enough in the area to be able to have a flexible conversation where you can get their point of view out. And the reason that the CEO is so critical to top line revenue growth is it starts at the top. And they need that feedback not only to know how to connect with prospective clients better, but if they're going to guide how the offering or the product or the service goes, they have to have a first-hand feedback. And so they're the most important people to get this process started. As they bring on salespeople, the salespeople will have that domain knowledge provided to them.
So let's go back a second. So the CEO is most important. So if this is an early stage company, early stage startup, say there's 4 people on their team. So the CEO, how much of this sales process, say they have a B2B product, I mean, how important is sales skills for him? And when he's talking, when he's trying to grow the company, talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, it's very rare that a CEO, unless they're done multiple companies, would have that skill. And it's totally fine for them to hire someone with that expertise, an employee or a consultant, because they can't create the process while they're trying to create the company. The key is not for them to become the most effective salespeople, but to understand what their customers really want. And that sales professional or consultant can help them with their knowledge of how these things work and how to give them feedback in these meetings. But fundamentally, they need to learn to a certain level in order to really understand and refine what market problem they're trying to solve.
So if later, or in these meetings, if they're getting a lot of feedback, and the feedback might be negative, how important is it that the CEO is able to listen to that feedback and possibly pivot the company for the company's success? Or should he just kind of brush it off and go to the next potential client?
It's kind of funny because there's someone who's been in 13 startups and now they teach at Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia.
Oh, wow.
And Stanford MBAs are pretty talented people.
Maybe.
But they're certain of it, and I'm going to go with their judgment. And he went to the administration and resigned in the middle of the semester.
Why?
The students were supposed to talk to 10 people. They didn't even have to be prospective clients with their business idea. And he found they were just frightened to do it, even these really talented people. And the only solution he had is he went to the next class and announced, anyone who doesn't see 10 people, I will flunk them in the class. So that solved the problem. But it was more a competing fear thing as opposed to getting the CEO comfortable with getting that feedback, which you need, even in a big company, all along the way in order to lead the company.
Wow. So how important is confidence then as a CEO?
Well, confidence is kind of an elusive thing. But the really persistent people aren't afraid to make fools of themselves frequently. And so it's just more of a persistence thing than feeling comfortable with, because again, for most CEOs that are doing startups, they have no experience base to feel comfortable from.
So for people at home that don't really have too much of a sales background, we pulled some questions from some startups. And one of the questions that came up was, any misconceptions in the industry, for example, the importance of being able to close a sale. How important is that?
Well, it's still a wide misconception in the industry today that somehow closing someone.
For people that don't know, can we talk a little bit about
yes,
what closing
closing.
means?
Okay, that's a good thing. So in the B2C environment, it's easy to talk about is like you kind of want to buy some shoes.
Yeah.
And if you get pressured a little bit, you'll make an impulse buy.
Okay.
So it's like, would you like those in brown or black, right?
Yeah.
And you're creating pressure on the prospective client, and impulsively they might say brown and they buy it and you're in great shape.
Yeah.
Most people don't bet their jobs in the B2B environment on being pressured. And the number one complaint is that the vast majority of salespeople are pushy.
Oh.
And so it breaks the relationship very early on. And so studies, including one of 38,000 sales calls, showed trying to pressure and using closing statements to get that buy is really correlated to losing the sale.
Oh, wow.
But it's still a popular misconception.
Yeah. Do you have any stories of aggressive salespeople?
I think the one that confuses people the most is there are certain companies that are well known in the Valley, we won't name names, that hired super ultra aggressive salespeople.
Okay.
And even after they stop growing, it's so ingrained in their culture that they're alienating people left and right.
Okay.
And what's happening is in the beginning, there's so much pull for their product and you're trying to capture market share. And you can hire pretty much anybody and just aggressively fire anybody who doesn't meet their number, because it's less important about alienating prospective clients than capturing market share, because your product speaks for itself.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a little of how this closer mentality continues on.
So you're trying to say the product was in such high demand, anyone could have sold it, and they basically hired aggressive people, thought they were doing a great job because of how much they were expanding, but in reality it was the product in that situation.
Yeah, and there's a lot, particularly in Silicon Valley, more than any place in the world, there's a lot of disruptive technologies which are a fraction of the price, all new function, much more accessible. So that situation happens much more frequently here.
Huh, interesting. So back to a startup founder. So startup founder, he was the one that was doing the sales, B2B or B2C, but now they've grown a little bit. They've gotten some funding, and they're ready to hire their first salesperson. What should that CEO be looking for in that salesperson? And let's go back to that CEO really doesn't have sales experience. I mean,
They've tried it.
They've tried it.
But they haven't got a long track record to
But
be able to
now they
spot
have
it.
the budget to hire that one guy. What kind of questions should they ask? What should they look for? How can they get the best person?
The people that close the most business, whether they're starting in sales or they're very advanced, always are able to get on their prospective clients or customers' side of the table. They've learned through trial and error that pushing people isn't something people like. So one of the big characteristics are folks who have really good communication skills to kind of figure out what's going on when things don't work, and actually are empathetic. And they're not just faking being interested in the prospective customer's problems. Because customers and people in general are very, very, very savvy about when somebody's being genuine or not.
Okay.
If you're not genuinely empathetic, it's not going to come across. Additionally, it's helpful if they've had out of college one real world job, because that's kind of an eye opener.
Okay.
And even better still, if they've been under quota pressure.
Really?
Because some personality types, it's just very, very distracting to them. And if they have those qualities I mentioned earlier and they've had those two experiences, you've got good odds of having success.
Okay. How difficult would it be for a small startup, though, to recruit that person versus, I'm guessing most of them would go to a corporation or someone that has, a bigger expense account.
Yeah, well, the people who have really proven track records are typically not going to go into a startup unless the customer traction is overwhelming.
Okay. Could you talk about customer traction, what that is?
It means just the CEO's idea is so powerful that even with their limited experience in selling, just like the example of those Silicon Valley disruptive companies, people just want to buy it because they already know what the problem is. They're already looking for capabilities and they already can't find them. So in that extreme, just going out and talking to people without sales skills,
Yeah.
you'll make sales.
Okay.
And then there's a big spectrum all the way to something that people don't even understand. And so the more traction, the more people are wanting to buy the product without all the skills, but just because it's so needed in the market. That's what salespeople are looking for, because then they can apply their skills and boost the company's revenue and their earnings dramatically.
Okay. One of these salespeople, say you hire one, you found him, super talented, not sure how you got him, but you got him. How much leeway, how much autonomy should the CEO give him?
Well, really good people like that are really mini CEOs or CEO and development type people. And so they're very creative. And if you have a product that's got good customer traction and they're not selling things that your company can't deliver, which you discover fairly soon, you want to be able to give them leeway, but you need to make sure that their incentive plan is very aligned with the company's. So the typical problem is if they're measured by revenue and you're measured by profitability, they're incented 10 times more than you are to discount. And so they're going to do that to maximize their earnings, just like the CEO is trying to maximize their earnings.
Okay.
So aligning the compensation so that everybody's win-win will eliminate a lot of headaches.
Interesting. And back to the questions that we pulled, someone's brought up sales hostage. Do you know what that is? Could you go into detail? I have never heard that term before.
If you talk to CEOs who've had unsuccessful experiences, even startups, they know exactly what it means. And the most extreme example I know is a founder was very, very technical and passionate. He had a way that hospitals could quickly tell that a patient was going downhill even though people weren't noticing.
Really?
In fact, the poor fellow lost his wife to the situation.
Wow.
And he came up with a method that hospitals could use to do this. But he really was so uncomfortable with trying to sell that he hired somebody. And that person actually was the executive, and they hired a few people, could sell. And the problem is that person kept selling, and every time he would sell more, he would ask for a greater piece of the pie. And then the founder got in an increasingly awkward situation where as the revenue grew, he was more dependent on this person to the point where almost none of the profit was coming to the company. And he couldn't fire this fellow. Wow. And so basically the company was bound to collapse after the commissions had been paid. And so he basically was in a position to lose his company because he didn't get involved and this sales executive had complete power.
Wow. So for more information on that, please visit Silicon Valley Successes. Visit us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or other social media channels. But let's get back to the interview. So Phil, that was an amazing example there. So how much control could a CEO take back in a situation, or how does he put boundaries there so something like that hostage sales situation doesn't happen?
Well, the only one I know about is what we talked about earlier, which is you can't be afraid to go out there, not to deliver the bunch of the revenue, but to stay enough in contact with your prospective buyers to know when the head of sales is really doing it properly and to be in a position to take it over if need be. As long as the person working for you knows they don't have a monopoly on growing the company, you're in a much stronger position. And of course, aligning the plans to make sure that it's a win-win, what we talked about, is also really important.
So for a salesperson, what type of compensation should a startup give that person? Should it be equity? Should it be base plus commission? Should it be 100% commission? What can the CEO give, especially of an early stage company that doesn't have much money?
Yeah. Well, the more customer traction you've got when you're hiring the person, the more the equity will be attractive. Without customer traction, a good sales representative is going to be looking more for commissions and dollars.
Okay.
The other thing too is the more convinced the candidate is that they want to be part of your company, the more they'll display an interest for commissions over base, and they'll take more commissions, more leverage, because that's their way of telling you, I think I can get a lot of customers, and I'm willing to bet my compensation on it.
Interesting. So with that, what advice would you give for an early stage founder about sales in general, or anyone at home that really doesn't know anything about sales, where kind of to start?
Again, I would just get comfortable going out and talking to your target market and understanding thoroughly about what their problems are, very thoroughly. Looking at objectively of what you can deliver and what you might be able to deliver. And then make sure there's a very clear definition for success with those early customers and get that feedback and keep improving the value you provide.
Interesting. So far today we've talked about B2B to C sales. We've talked about the CEO and some of their sales skills. We've also talked about hostage situation with sales. We've talked about compensation for your sales rep and recruiting the sales rep. We've talked about many areas. What questions do you normally get that we've missed today?
I think all of those, we've covered the vast majority of them, but the one is how to put it, I put together enough materials and content to get the salespeople I do hire up to where they're profitable. Because once a salesman is break even, you can hire another one. So you want to get that learning curve to be as small as possible.
What are ways to shorten that learning curve?
Like I don't want to harp on it, but like being out there to understand what works. Spending the time to figure out how someone who doesn't have your background can be not as proficient as you, but more proficient, and what works and doesn't work as you watch them come up to speed. And
then what sales advice would you give someone that has 5 or 10 years experience in sales?
There's this effect where after you've been successful for a while and you're making a living in sales versus a lot of people who can't, that you've learned all there is to know. So you can ask your prospective clients and the people who didn't buy from you, did you feel I was genuine? Did you feel I understood your problems? Did you understand? Did I make it clear where we might provide value? And overall, did you build trust with me? And they'll tell you if you really want to know.
Really? How important is it, I'm just going to go back to that question of hiring the salesperson, to have that person already have an established network in that area that you're selling?
Yeah, the challenge, and let's say there's all kinds of different markets, but let's talk about someone with a startup. There's been a lot of the tone. The challenge for someone started with a startup, assuming there's not huge traction, in which case you can attract anybody, is someone who really does have that network, and everybody will claim to, has too many options. And they will go to the place where the customer traction is most established, and they don't have to create the sales process and do all the things we've talked about. So that's the key, is don't rely too heavily on the network, because you really won't know how strong it is. And a lot of people who have a network, what that means is they've sold to them in the past. But that doesn't mean that they've built a lot enough trust to come in with something new. It might mean that that company was really desperate and needed the product, and they actually alienated the customer.
Interesting.
So it's very hard to assess networks ahead of time. People who really have them have lots of options. So just be careful if that becomes too dominant a factor in your hiring.
And another question about the CEO and the first sales hire. What type of KPIs, key performance indicators, should they set for that salesperson? How to go about thinking those up, making those dates and that quota?
So the first person you hire is the one who's going to be kind of like your guide in the wilderness. They've been to selling, so they know what RFPs are, and they know how to read signals better than someone just starting.
RFP request for?
Request for price, request for quote. This is where they mail out all these big documents and let everybody beat themselves up to win the business, right? So they know all the lingo, as you just demonstrated. So that's that first person. That first person is working with you, and you'll be involved with them very intimately. When you get to the next person who's going to try to learn the method, the KPI is really how many sales they close and building them a ramp that's realistic. So month by month and month, the level of business they need to develop is accelerating.
Okay.
Because you're trying to get them within whatever you know your training time to be or what you can afford, that if they can't get up to being profitable in whether that's 60, 90, 4 months, that they know that it's not going to work out.
And then for a CEO or a startup founder, what's the one piece of advice, most powerful advice you could give them?
Don't be afraid to go out and talk to your prospective clients. It's the only way.
Great. And Phil, we got a minute left. Could you tell the audience once again how they can reach you, what type of consulting you do, your ideal client, all that jazz?
Yeah, certainly. My clients are typically B2B clients, or almost exclusively actually. And they typically, occasionally it'll be an individual CEO who's got something working really well, and they're ready to hire 2 or 3 people because they not only know what they're doing, but they're ready to externalize it so they can bring people on. But typically it's 3 or 4 salespeople up to about 40. Above that, it's very complicated to change fundamentally how they're approaching things. And if they want to reach me, my email address, because I love to have coffees with people, you can tell I'm kind of enthusiastic about the topic, and they could just email me at phil@operopartners.com.
Could you spell that out, please?
Certainly, that's OPERO Partners, all one word, .com.
That's great. And Phil, I want to thank you for coming on Silicon Valley Successes. This was an amazing episode, and there's a ton of great information. So everyone at home, our next guest is Ralph Luong, who is a former investment banker who founded 88 Ships. So we look forward for next episode. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you from all of us at Silicon Valley Successes. We hope you found the information presented today useful in your path to success. For further information on accessing the resources in Silicon Valley, you may visit us on the web at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, on Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you. And remember, we want to help you in your journey to become the next success.